Turn it up. Woo. Lean back. Woo. Kick your feet. Let it smack. From the coast to the highline pines, we've been talking about the same old lines. Big suits taking up all our time, while the rent climbs and the kids ask why. Kitchen table feels like town hall, grandma cussing at the late night call. We don't fit in their shopping mall, so we built this show and we said it all. It's that slap.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Oregon Voices. I'm Eric McGuire and I'm joined by Katherine Watkins. Between the two of us, we've been in Oregon classrooms for 60 years, and we've seen some shit. We arrive in this space seeing the world as it is, and we come to this place through radically different lived experiences. But here's what we share. We're done pretending Oregon's blue state label means what people think it means. Oregon calls itself progressive, forward-thinking, a state that takes care of its people. But over the coming weeks and months, we're going to break down what the blue state status actually delivers to Oregonians. And spoiler, it's not what you've been told. We'll focus on education, politics, policy, and economics, but we're not limiting ourselves. We're bringing you voices the establishment doesn't platform, voices they'd rather you not hear, stories about where the money actually goes, who this state really serves, and what happens when promises meet reality. Because behind Oregon's blue state branding, there's something else entirely. And with primary season coming up, it's time more people knew the truth. Welcome to Oregon Voices. Let's get started.
Yes. I'm so excited for this project. So I think what we should probably do is get into introducing ourselves so people can decide, do they even want to listen to us? Are we people with backgrounds they can relate to or backgrounds that they can learn from?
All right.
So I think you should start. This
Okay.
is your baby. And so I would like to just know about, just your background. How do you intersect? And so starting out with just a little bit about your childhood of how were you as a child, your family background, your education, and then anything else you want to share with us to get us to know you.
All right. Fantastic. I grew up in a small town south of Eugene called Cottage Grove. My family was all in wood products. My dad worked for a warehouser for over 30 years. And so I grew up in a town that was almost entirely white. And so I lived in that experience, not knowing anything different, until I visited my mother. My parents were divorced when I was 2 years old. And so I visited my mom in Los Angeles. And so going from Cottage Grove to Los Angeles was quite an experience for me as a 7 or 8 year old. And so that opened my eyes a bit, but still living in Cottage Grove. I graduated from Cottage Grove High School in our year of our Lord, 1985. And so then, so my upbringing was solidly working class, blue collar. Neither of my parents had a college education. And I spent a lot of time just doing the things that you would do in kind of a dominant culture, white society, which is not thinking about anything else outside of your own existence in this kind of small little town. And so, lived with my dad for several years on our own. My brother, who is a couple years younger than I am, we both lived with a single dad for quite a while, which was not the norm in those days. And so, a lot more comes from that time of my life that I'll share later. But, for the most part, he did his best in the 70s to raise two young boys. And then after graduating, I attended Southern Oregon State College. At that time was called SOSC, not Southern Oregon University. And then I headed for Los Angeles, as any smart 19-year-old would do, and worked there. I ended up attending college there for several years, and eventually, after about 4 years, moved back to Oregon to assist with my grandmother and helping her get through the death of my grandfather. So just, kind of back and forth between those two places. I graduated from Oregon State in 91, and then off back to California to go to graduate school.
Wow.
And then the partner I was with at that time was not having it because of the 1992 riots that were occurring in Los Angeles at the time, and I worked downtown Los Angeles at the time. And so ended up back in Oregon again, and back at George Fox College or University, where I got my master's in teaching, and then just jumped right into a job in the Beaverton School District.
Wow. Now, I remember you said in one of our conversations that your interest wasn't to be a teacher initially. So what did you go to college for originally?
Well, as any good social studies teacher will tell you, their degree is in liberal studies. Mm-hmm. So I have a liberal studies degree from Oregon State. My goal was to get out into the world. I had gotten a taste of some classes when I went to Cal Poly Pomona that were intriguing to me. My first professors of color who really opened the world up to this kid from Cottage Grove. Wow. I actually applied for the Peace Corps and was accepted by the Peace Corps, and I turned it down because I let my family talk me out of it because I was not a strong enough person at that time to be confident in what I was doing.
Was that their message or your belief?
I look back on it now after what I've kind of gone through, and that was I believed them. That was I was not who I am now. Oh. So I was not able to kind of process that pushing back against my family. Yeah. So, yeah.
So what came to head where you're like, education, that's what I'm going to choose?
I went back for a time and helped do some coaching at my former high school, and just kind of got involved with that crowd of coaches and stuff, and decided, well, I had enough anthropology degrees to get a degree in anthropology. So I'm like, well, what can I do with this? And Oregon State was like, well, go here for a year and we'll give you a degree. And so that kind of put me on the track of education. And as it happens, in 1991, as we'll come to this topic later in episodes, the year I graduated from Oregon State was the year that Measure 5 passed. And the social studies teacher program at Oregon State was eliminated. Yeah. And so that sent me, guess where? Back to California. So I've kind of lived through the experience of Oregon's education system as a kid, as a student in college, and now as a teacher for over 30 years. So it's been an interesting ride.
And then when did you become a teacher for the Beaverton School District?
1994.
94.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Because that was my first year of college.
Okay. Yeah.
So, wow. Yeah. Okay. And so you've been a teacher for 32 years, and you are kind of considering what about education? Where are you going to keep on doing this, or?
That's a really good question. I want to keep on teaching as long as the opportunity is there, but I also feel like I've had enough experiences and enough spaces in education, enough roles in education, that I have something else to offer, some bigger perspective from the higher altitude, where you can kind of see a lot more happening behind the scenes. And there's a lot more to that, but I will always be in education, whatever I'm doing. But in terms of being in the classroom, I want to be done with that in the near future.
Yeah, after 32 years, I think you've earned that. Yeah. So you've also been behind the scenes of education. So do you want to talk a little bit about the work that you've done behind the scene, like with union work and other things you've endeavored?
So I've been a building rep off and on my whole career. And then also well, this kind of fits into that, but I ran for school board last year in Beaverton, which was a transformational experience for me, which we'll get into more later. And then also this year I was elected in the East County Uniserv region to be a member of the Legislative Advancement Council, which is a position with OEA in which you help guide policy priorities for the OEA.
Nice.
So, yeah, that's a couple of examples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's see. So you are a married man. You have
Yes.
how many children?
I have 3 children,
3 children, grown.
21, 18, and 17. One daughter still at Westview High School, going to graduate
Very cool.
this year. So I spent 30 years at Beaverton, or in the Beaverton School District, and I lived in the Beaverton School District for 30 years.
That's amazing.
Just recently am now a citizen of Woodburn,
Yes, you are.
which I love. I absolutely love
Yeah.
being somewhere else.
Absolutely. But that commute is
So,
crazy.
Yeah.
That commute
It
is
is, yeah.
wild.
Okay, well, let's move on a little bit. I have a question for you. Again, you can feel free to fill in like I did with my background as much as you feel comfortable. But also, I was curious what made you say yes to this project. So you can kind of wrap those two things together if you want.
Say yes. You know, it feels like it's just a natural progression of where my life has been leading up. And so you and I have worked together, not in buildings together, but doing union work and ending up in the same places and stuff. And you're also married to one of my friends. And so I got to have a connection with you that way. And so when you asked me, of course I'm going to do it because I trust what you're doing. I've been watching you grow over the years. I think what this podcast is going to offer is something that all of us have been kind of waiting for. And I'm excited to be able to put my 2 cents in. And I have lots of lived experiences that I can try to reflect on and give a little bit of a different perspective than what is kind of out there already. Yeah. And so when you asked, I was like, I'd be honored.
Fantastic. Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and your lived experience and your process of socialization to come to where you are right now. Okay.
Well, let's see. I mean, it's pretty involved, so I'll try not to make it too long, but it is pretty thick. So my parents married just about 6 months after the Loving versus Virginia Supreme Court case. And so it used to be illegal for interracial marriages. And so they were married in Texas, and it was not appreciated. And they were chased out by the KKK. And so we ended up in California. So my dad is Black and my mom is white, although she later learned that she's Native American, and that's a whole story within itself. But she was presented white. And so my mother always wanted to make sure that I wasn't lost in my identity, and so she was very much focused on making sure that I had Black literature, Black music, Black history, and so that there used to be a term for mixed race people called mulatto. We don't use this word because we are not mules. We have proven we can reproduce. And we're not beasts of burden. But there was a term called tragic mulatto, and this was like a mixed race person who didn't know who they were because they were like in between worlds. And she was so worried about that because that was a real thing in the movies and just especially in the South. And so she wanted to make sure that I was very firm that I was a mixed race child. And so my parents ended up divorcing when I was around 4. And so my mother moved us on to a Lakota reservation in Dupree, South Dakota. And so she brought my sister and myself there. And she met a powwow drummer and singer, and they got married, and that produced my brother. And so we were there for about 2 years, but unfortunately the relationship was very abusive, and so we ran from the reservation a few times trying to escape. But that experience was so impoverished, and we had government food, commodities, and stuff like that. So I had a lot of experience of that, and also fighting children because they didn't like that we were Black children on the reservation. And so very young, I knew what race was. The very first time I was called the N-word, I was 4 years old. And it wasn't by a white person. And so I had to deal with that. And so it was just always on the forefront. And then eventually my mother left. And so after being a housewife for about 12 years, she went into college. And so we escaped to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And she was a single mom of 3. And she went to Augustana College and just started her literary degree. And for the next 14 years, all the way through UC Santa Cruz, UC Berkeley, she got her PhD in ethnic studies and Native American literature. And throughout that, I was moved everywhere, so moved about 13 times. We were the welfare children that Reagan was cutting off in the 80s when he finally said, single moms, if you're going to school, you're not going to be getting as much support, and that was very devastating. So I was very aware of a lot of political things because every time there was a new law, it affected us. And then my mother openly panicked about it. And so I'm neurodivergent. And so I pick up on patterns and I'm seeing everything. And so I was just a very conscientious child. And so I would read about things, I'd watch the news, and just was like a really, like socially conscious child. And so it's just unescapable. So again, like when you called for me to come, I'm like, of natural progression, this is what I do. I want to talk about the things that are unfair. I want to examine them. I want to see how can we push through that. And so I was not a good student. I was not diagnosed right away, but I have dyslexia. I have an auditory processing disorder. I have a language processing disorder. Eventually, as I got older, I found out that I'm actually autistic. And so all of this stuff started helping me help my students. And so I became a teacher when I was 23 years old. And the reason why I wanted to be a teacher was because when I entered the classroom for kindergarten, my household was very violent. There was a lot. By this time, we were on the reservation, and so there was just a lot of violence. The classroom was the one place of peace, and there was cookies, and there were like little cute counting bears, and so I loved every part of education. And so within that first week, I was like, this is what I want to do. Kids are happy. Everything's happy. I want to be a teacher. And so all the way throughout my life, I thought I was going to be a teacher. And then when I barely graduated with a 2.1, my counselor wasn't calling me in like all the other students. And so everybody's getting their college acceptance letters, and I go to her and I go, what about me? And she laughed and she said, we're just happy you're graduating. And I'm like, but I want to be a teacher. And so she said that I should consider cosmetology. And at this point, I was such a tomboy, like that was such an offense. I'm like, mechanics, maybe, but cosmetology. And so I went home and I was crying. And even my counselor was like, I don't even know how you had such a bad GPA when you have a mother who is a PhD student at UC Berkeley. So then she's intimating neglect, which, yes, there was neglect, but there was also learning disabilities. There was a lot of issues and barriers to get me to that education that I needed. And so I came home and I was crying, and my mom was like, get over it, go to community college, catch up, and then you can get into community college, or you can go to university. And so I did that, and I had amazing educators who would show me every single error and tell me why it was wrong, and then let me redo it. And that taught me how to be that kind of teacher. And then I was like, that's the teacher I want to be. I want to give children chance after chance, let them learn from their mistakes. And so from that, I just dug in even harder. I'm going to go to university. And so I left the community college in California with a 3.8. And by that time, my mother graduated UC Berkeley, and she got a job at the University of Idaho. And I was like, see ya, I'm not going to Idaho. But there was a lot of family dysfunction, and they guilted me to go. And so I left. I was engaged at that point. I left my fiance, asking him to join me in Idaho to go to college there. And I went to Idaho. It was horrible. I was living in the Bay Area, so it was a multicultural bubble. I literally thought we were past everything that we're dealing with, because in the Bay Area, like, I was not an anomaly. Mixed children were all over the place. Being confused for being part Black was not an issue down there. And then I moved up to Idaho, and it was like, where are you from? You know, what are you? It was just like a total accosting of my identity. And I had that, you know, not to say that, you know, Bay Area is not perfect. So like, you'd have these glips, right? But in Idaho, it was like a weekly experience. You know, if it wasn't from the students, it was from the professors. If it wasn't from that, it was the customers at the job I had. And so my mother was a professor. I did my job, my degree up there, got a degree in English, and I was like, I'm going to be an English teacher. And as soon as I could get out, I left. I found my ex-husband, so we drove down to Arizona and got married, and I taught there for 3 years in Yuma, so we're right on the border. And so I got a great experience of dealing with migrant children. And so sometimes we'd have children for like 6 months, sometimes 3 months, and so it was just a different kind of rotation. So you have to learn to be a different kind of teacher and like set up your units. And then my mother lost her job at in Idaho, and she said she was going to come to Oregon to write on the beach. And I was like, you haven't finished a book. So I spoke to my ex-husband, and he's like, let's just get out of Idaho, because he couldn't deal with the heat. And so we came up here, and then so we've been up here for 24 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Cool.
so I first started teaching at Scappoose, and that was miserable. They had the N-word on my walls a lot. They called me the N-word. Eventually, the principal said, you should go to Beaverton, where there's more people like you. And the vice principal backed it up by saying, think of it like a bad marriage. You'd get out of it, right? And so I was like, So I applied for Beaverton and got in, and I worked for 20 years there. And I spent 16 years at Aloha High School, which is an impoverished school, one of the most diverse schools. And so that was my joy. I loved working with those students. And I eventually started voicing things for the students as they came to me, and that caused problems after problems after problems. And so eventually I just had to go. I guess we'll get into that later on.
We can do that in another episode. It's going to take a lot longer.
It is.
Yeah.
So, so I've been teaching for 28 years, and I am currently now doing online school, and I'm loving it. But there's also kind of a sadness because I miss the classroom, but the classroom's not the classroom that I had left.
Right.
And I also did work with the union, so with OEA. I was the chair for CORE, the Committee of Racial Equity, and I also ran for equity director. And now that I am on an online school, it's not union, and so I'm just kind of a free agent doing that stuff.
Nice.
So yeah, that's about me in a big nutshell.
Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah. All right, so let's delve into why this podcast. You had said that this is a year work of you dreaming and creating, and so why did this even come to your mind as something you want to pursue?
Yeah, it was very organic, I guess, to use that phrase. In 2024 was my last year at in Beaverton. I was teaching at Mountainside High School. And one of the groups of students in my class, one of these young ladies, who I will not name because I haven't asked for that permission, but she said, I really like your voice. You should start a podcast.
Aww.
And I said, oh, you really do? Because no one likes their voice, right? So anyway, I'm like, that seed was planted in my head. And so as I went through the next few years, which was a transition from Beaverton to Centennial Middle School, where I am now, Once I was out of Beaverton, the whole thing kind of struck me as like, okay, now I have this experience being in that school district. I have an experience now being in an absolutely different school district. Those two things alone should lend themselves to questions about education in the state of Oregon. And then just to briefly mention that I spent time between 2020 and 2022 going back to school to Portland State in their Gender, Race, and Nations program, which is a graduate certificate. So it's not quite a master's, but it's about half a master's, but it's 24 credits, which was kind of an explosion of everything for me, understanding what I was not teaching, that as a point of reference, just of many things, as of 2020, I had never taught students in my social studies class about Tulsa as a social studies teacher. And so this was a reckoning that I had to deal with as someone who thought they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And I got to do that in the comfort of my own home during COVID, right? I didn't have to be around other people, so to speak. But that made me grow in this idea of beginning to question the people who I thought we were all working together in education.
Yeah.
And it became readily apparent when I started wanting to do actual professional developments of raising awareness of what it meant to live in a world of whiteness and dominant culture, that nobody wanted to talk to me. Even the people I thought that were administrators that were pretty progressive.
Yeah.
So that made me want to do a podcast even more, because that's really the only way you can independently reach people these days, right?
Yeah.
Most mainstream media does not want to talk about things that are this fundamental to how we exist. And so that kept pushing me. And the more I spent time at Centennial Middle School, also a district that is struggling, that I just believed that this was the avenue to be able to have a free platform that I could delve into any topic I wanted to. And being someone who looks like me, can say pretty much whatever I want.
Yeah.
and I don't really care what people think, because I hold this position in our society by no other qualification besides being a white cisgender male. But that's the leverage that I felt like I needed to start using. So that's kind of the nutshell of my feeling about the podcast. And ever since I've met, the people in my current year after running for office, the ideas have just exploded in terms of where this can go. So that's kind of the nutshell of the genesis of that.
Yeah. And, as we were talking about this before, you were talking about, just about your upbringing and that stark awakening of like, my life is not the way that it was programmed to be. Like,
right.
The script is not real. And then just, having that realization that you were a textbook teacher, and so do you want to talk a little bit about like how you were raised in whiteness and like, how were there like messages, or do you feel like it was just, the way, Does that make sense?
It's the way.
It's the way.
The messages are non-existent in a town like Cottage Grove. When I grew up there. It's a different town now in terms of its diversity. But when I was there, there was only about 6,000 people. And now there's, I think, well over 10,000, if I'm not mistaken. But, for me, it was the lack of message, the lack of anybody stepping in when I was in high school. And the worst of it is, as a teacher, I wasn't even a textbook teacher. I thought I was pulling up documents and primary documents and I thought I was teaching in a progressive manner. And within the system that I was working in, I was.
Yeah, as progressive as they wanted you to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why I was deceiving myself, because I thought I was contributing to what I know today as anti-racist teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that's what I was doing without knowing what that was.
Yeah.
And that I'm putting in my time. This is what I'm doing to make things better. And so once I realized that that was all a facade, it was a mirage, whatever it was, that's when it really kicked in for me, that immediately I stopped teaching that way. And without even really knowing what I was doing, I shifted everything away from that and into very real conversations about race, identity. I spent the first 9 weeks of my teaching ninth graders in Beaverton about identity, race, thinking about their own background and what that contributes to how they see the world. So it definitely shifted right away, but it all was embedded in those first 17 years of socialization, of how we're raised and what we see, and the people around us that we hold close that show us the examples of how to live. And all those people they're white folks.
Yeah.
Through and through. So, but I think that's another facet of the podcast for me, is like, that's a message that I want to share with people, that that's not a bad thing. The good thing is like realizing it. Yes. And realizing it, how that has an impact on how you are, not just as a person out in the world, but as a teacher trying to support and help students. That comes out in ways that are not healthy if you don't know kind of where you come from. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that answers the question or not. But.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's also that part of like, that stark realization, but then it's like, where are you now then? And where do you go from here with all that knowledge, but then also looking at your past, and then how do you digest that? Because it's like you have to look at it through a new lens now. And, I have a partner who's white, and so he's done his journey, and I see a lot of mourning. I see a lot of devastation, but I see a lot of freedom. I see a lot of rage, where he's looking for others who are realizing this, and it's kind of hard for him to be able to find similar people who are like, wait a minute, what? I was told this, and this is, so I really appreciate that you're doing this, because we need people like you, or white men, to actually be voicing this, especially in a time where there are so many podcasts that have so much negativity. We need the positivity to come on, and they need the models, especially the younger kids, that they know that this is okay to question everything, and then to say, I don't like how people have been molding me to do something. I want to be an individual, and I want a voice, and I want to stand up for things that are wrong.
Right.
That are wrong.
Yeah. I think the only other thing that I would add to that is that, along with this, and we'll probably get to this in another episode, but there's also another half of this conversation about my own identity. Mm-hmm. And so when you live a life up until you're 52, of one way of seeing the world and thinking about the world, and that is your identity. That's who you are. And then you go through the process of an identity change, literally. Half of that is what I've already explained, kind of realizing my professional identity, but also the personal journey that takes place during the same exact period of time during that 2020 year. And so I was able to finally come to some realizations about my own mental health and my own socialization as a child, and what that did to my own view of the world, and that affected my own way of dealing with trauma, dealing with conflict. People don't like to deal with conflict. They don't know how to do it. Yeah. And so I went through a process and a program that's called dialectical behavioral therapy. And it was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it's about learning skills. It wasn't about a lot of therapy. It was just about spending time learning how to de-escalate, learning how to process, learning how to go through meditation, how to control your thinking. So those skills then I was able to kind of use in conjunction with my own change in identity professionally. And so stepping into conflict in my own workspaces when people, I worked in a department of a lot of white folks, as one would in Beaverton.
Yes.
Right? And so like there's no one openly saying anything or doing anything that would be, rub you the wrong way. But people, when you hear things finally in the world that you recognize immediately as being either racist or prejudiced or whatever they are, you don't unsee those things.
Yeah.
They're there permanently.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the one big shift, is that once you go through any process of realization, you will not see the world the same way again.
Yeah, there's no turning back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's a lot of devastation with that, but there's also there's so much unity, and there's so much there's power in that, because you start meeting everybody and you see their struggles, and then you don't feel alone anymore. And so you start developing your people, even though you're going to lose a lot of people within your awakening. It's really sad. I feel so bad for my partner. I mean, he's lost friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got a queer daughter. He's dating me, and so he can't unhear the N word or the F word, and you can't.
Yeah.
Once you are aware, you can't just be like, I love you, Dad.
And I don't know if it's unique to my experience, but I have no regrets. I have no I'm not mourning anything about all of that. I spent so much time in that, just not doing things that were productive,
Mm-hmm.
that I feel like I've met the people that I'm supposed to be with. Clearly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right.
So that's the beauty of it for me, is that I have actually found a circle of people that believe in me
Mm-hmm.
and love me, but that I also know that I will be with for the rest of my life.
Absolutely.
So
yeah. So forever the educator, taking it to a whole nother level.
Exactly.
With this podcast. I love it.
So I think I want to ask a question. What, because you and I have known each other a long time,
Mm-hmm.
but we've not been in spaces together almost at all.
No.
Except for virtually many years ago.
Yes.
One time about a year ago
Mm-hmm.
at a retreat.
Yes, with our good friend Ben.
And then one other time that was like a couple months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so what reservations, if any, or what things in this partnership are you thinking that might feel uneasy, or are there things that you think could come up that could be a problem?
I'm someone that, while I hate conflict, I'll run right through it because I need it resolved, and I'm not going to let it stand in my nervous system. So, and you just seem very receptive to problems and wanting to know what problems are. So I just kind of feel like, because I've seen how you do deal with issues and stuff like that, that if there's any problems, that I know that I could just be like, hey, could we do a side note for a second, or, just talking about it. But I think you also know my heart, and that if I question something or if I don't like something, it's not a personal attack. And I would never call you out of your name or anything like that, but it would just be seriously like, could we check on that for a second? Because I am also the forever educator. Right? And so I never want to close things down. And I think also because you're an educator, I know you're a researcher. And I know that if you don't know something, you're going to go find it out. And that if you still have questions, you're very comfortable asking questions. And so I haven't picked up on anything that I feel is a roadblock or something that wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. And if I did, I probably would have reservations of even sitting with you. I would probably feel like we would have to meet a lot more or something like that. But from all the interactions that we've had and stuff like that, and us texting and our phone calls and stuff like that, everything has just been so pleasant. And if it ever gets to the point where it is uncomfortable, I just know that I could just be like, hey, Eric, I'm having trouble with this. Or could we, take a moment and then come back to this? And so, yeah, I mean, I just, I don't know, it just feels very organic.
Yeah.
And maybe it's also that we are in our beautiful 50s, that we just don't have time for that.
Right.
There's bigger issues than my feelings are hurt, and if my feelings are hurt, I'm going to air it. I trust you would as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've just we have a good open understanding. And I think that's the biggest part of any work that you do, is that you have to have those boundaries down. Is like, is this a good place where we can do this work?
Right.
And if it's not, then it's like, we got a lot more work to do before we can even discuss the issues. But you and I have been working on ourselves. I've done 16 years of therapy. I read lots of things. And then, you've done your DBT and all that other stuff. So we're
Right.
working people. So.
Yeah. Functional.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that this kind of brings us to a point of kind of one of the foundations of the podcast is that in a state like Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
I did teach and learn about the history of Oregon and its exclusionary history and past. And so one of the important parts of this podcast is that everything we do is part of the thinking behind it is about a multiracial solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first guests we're going to have on is going to speak to that from the perspective, many, many years of perspective in the business of training people in that regard. But in a state like Oregon, it is, well, it goes without saying, almost. If you know anything about Oregon history, you know that our institutions and our state was built by people that look like me.
Yeah.
Almost entirely. Maybe until the late 1950s and 60s, when perhaps some women and some people of color were involved in some of the decisions. But the institutions that we live with are almost certainly based on the beliefs and systems of white men.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, one of the reasons I wanted you to join me is based on one of my first experiences learning about whiteness, which was listening to a podcast called Seen on Radio.
Mm-hmm.
And the episode, the season number 2, which is called Seen White. And this is part of when the young lady mentioned to me, you should start a podcast. That immediately went into my head because the host of that podcast is white. He's a documentarian. And he finally decided after Charlottesville that he was going to turn the camera on himself.
Oh, wow.
As a white man and not point the camera out to everyone else. But one of the things that he did is he checked himself right away by adding this very amazing professor called Chenjerai Komanika, who was a communications professor. I think it was at Rutgers or Clemson. I can't remember the school, but so he checked himself constantly against his perspective, which was a really interesting perspective of the host, but his co-host checked him quite often about angles he did not see and things that he did not understand. And so that's why I feel like this podcast is so important, to have two very different people who are willing, in my case, to be checked.
Yeah.
And it's a super important aspect of being able to have a productive podcast.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So that's one of my first things that I thought of when I thought of doing a podcast, is that I don't want to do it by myself. I don't want to be the guy, the white guy telling people what it's like. So that's why even if, you have something else that comes up and you can't be here for one episode, I will find someone, because I'm not going to do this on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I think that's a great formula, because you need voices. And to be able to be checked by people too, and to know that it's not against you, it's just a thought. It might be incorrect. And so wouldn't you want to be corrected? Otherwise, you don't love me if you're not checking me. You're letting me just be all wrong. The greatest act of love is to be in that discomfort and be like, hey, babe, you're a little skewed there. Let me help you a little bit. And so it's like, I like doing that. I like being able to help people, and I love when people help me, because I don't want to be going around talking, untruths. And so please correct me, give me sources. I want to read that stuff. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about you. I know that as my commute has lengthened since I now live in Woodburn.
Yes.
So I have a lot of time on my hands to think. And so as I'm driving to work and back from work, things swim through my head all the time about this podcast and all of the things that I want to do. As for yourself, when I first asked you to begin thinking about doing this podcast, what were some of the initial things in your head that you're thinking, oh, we could do this, we could do this, oh, here's something we could do. And so just give us a sense of like what's going through your head when you think about the possibilities.
Yeah, it's just there's so much potential. But, first and foremost, being an educator and being a teacher for 28 years, I've really seen a decrease in what drew me to the classroom. And, one of our conversations we had of like, if you had the choice to choose to be a teacher, you just graduated high school and you get to choose, would you have chosen teaching? And I am just kind of shocked that my answer is no. And because again, I wanted to be a teacher since I was 5 years old. So it was just hardwired in my head. I got my brother when I was 5 years old. He was my first student, and I would read to him. I taught him everything. And I'm just a self-learner as it is. And so I picked up the piano and the cello, and I got scholarships to a music school. So I was like just a perpetual student, even though I struggled in K through 12. But having that experience in community college, like just really showed me how a teacher could really flip a classroom. And so I was so excited to do that. And so first teaching in Arizona, having that flexibility of like just try to reach the kids any way you can. And we were able to do projects. We were able to just do anything that was fun for the kids to read and to like connect. So I had kids taking recipes from like Water for Chocolate because they had the recipes but they didn't have the measurements, and the kids would like go home and they'd create it, and we all sit and with spoons and we'd try it out, or they'd do like dioramas. But I'd have like lists of all these creative things the kids could do in class, and it was just the best thing. And within 2 years, state testing came on scene. And so I was in Arizona. It was called AIMS. And, we were supposed to be the forefront of state testing. And so not the whole country hadn't done it yet. I already hated it the moment we did it. But we were still allowed to be creative in the classroom. It wasn't test heavy. I wasn't being questioned about assessments. It was just, are the kids learning? And so I got that, just the joy of being in the classroom all the way up to, after 3 years in Arizona, I come up to Oregon, doing really fun things in Scappoose, despite the tension, and then going to Aloha and still having just so much fun interacting with kids and like trying to freak them out with like historical documents. And it was so fun. And then they started cinching it in more and more, testing. And then No Child Left Behind came, and you just started seeing all the joys of teaching going away, and then you started seeing the joys of learning going away. And I was like, what is causing this? And it was always laws. It was always people who were not teachers, people who didn't even go to college and have pedagogy, making rules for children who didn't even know about child development, who didn't know about child psychology. And then having to be on the forefront of seeing children rebelling and being angry and hating to read when I had experience of children who did used to love to read. And so, having all of that experience had always been in my head, but I didn't know what to do. And then I got to the point where I started doing union work because they're like, hey, we could do bills and we can start changing things. So I was like, okay, let's do this. And so I started doing my little house bills too and rallying up people and, doing speeches to try to get people to vote and change things in the classroom, and then seeing how hard it was and seeing people listening to you as someone on the front line and saying, I have a student who did this, who does this. I have a parent who is worried about this. And then people going, yeah, that sucks. We're going to do this anyway. And we're just going to not teach for a week and do a test. And then so that only made me want to fight harder. So it's like, okay, where's another avenue that I could try to find justice for our students? And then I had my child. And so it's like, oh, my child's in the school now. I really have to fight because I'm a parent. And so just seeing how fight after fight, it was always 2 steps back. Mm-hmm. Like you gained just a little bit of something, and then someone would come and just wipe it all out. And then people saying that it was for the benefit of the children when you're literally seeing children screaming and eloping, running away, and they don't want to go to school. And then seeing my own son not wanting to go to school. And I'm like, so, and so having that experience, and then also just seeing how teachers are treated, and I would see all these new teachers coming in and they'd be crying immediately. And then, around 2005, they were talking about the 3 to 5 year burnout. Teachers won't last 3 to 5. And I'm like, they're leaving sooner than 3 to 5. And so originally we had programs that we were trying to do, new teacher programs to get them with mentors. And, I was like, okay, this is great. But they weren't switching anything up to make the job easier. And so, things like that where I'm like, has it gotten any better or is it worse? Are we enticing people in to become educators? No. Used to be, I could ask students, okay, it would be like the end of the school year. Like, okay, you guys, you saw what I did. Who wants to be a teacher? And you'd have some kids raising their hands, and year after year, less and less. And now I'm just laughed at. They're like, are you serious? Why would I want to be a teacher? Look at how we treat you. I'm like, oh, you said that. Okay, yeah, okay, I get it. But the need is still there. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing the transformation of education where people are trying to say, let AI teach the children. We just need a monitor. So you're going to then pay somebody minimum wage to watch a child as they interact with a computer all day. Mm-hmm. And where's the at-risk play where they get to learn and develop in real time with their peers on the playground, making mistakes and learning from them? Everything's just so cushioned and protected that we now have children that are like debilitated. If it takes more than 3 clicks to get to an assignment and to submit it, it's too much. Yeah. You have too many words on the Canvas page. Mm-hmm. It's too much. We have acquiesced so much. Yeah. And so to be able to like come to the podcast and really tell people what's going on, because you've got people who are reporting this stuff who are not teachers. Some aren't even parents, or some are parents, but maybe they have trauma from their high school years, or their, right. And so they're using it from their anger from their teachers, but they're not looking at the individual situation. Mm-hmm. And so just doing that, but then also towards the end of my career with Beaverton School District, we were given very strict lines of, this is what we're doing now. We're an anti-racist school district, so we're going to do this, and we're going to do this summit, and we're going to, so I was like, all right, we're all on board. We're going to do this. And I speak out, and it becomes a huge issue when I was only parroting what the superintendent was saying. Mm-hmm. And then rather than being supported, I'm thrown under the bus. And then I look at the other teachers who are also abandoned, who were only doing what they were told by their bosses. And they were totally just like lepers. And so that also then made me want to be like, no, this is stuff that needs to be spoken about, because no one understands when a teacher is told to do something, we're gonna do it. It's our job. But then what happens when it goes sideways?
Right.
Where's the support? So yay, we do have our union, and thank God for OEA for that, because they did support me, but it was a fight. It was not easy. My local union was not supportive because it was during a bargaining, and they didn't want to do waves. But meanwhile, I'm getting consumed and mistreated, and so luckily OEA was like, "Well, we're going to take care of you." And so, just all of those little parts where I'm just like, those things need to be spoken about so that other people don't have to suffer, because it's already been done. So if it's already been done, we can learn from it and then do better, theoretically. But that's not what's happening. And, especially after that whole situation where we had an anti-racist summit, people watched how everything went down, and they regressed. People who were speaking and were doing great things, they got scared, and so the point was made, and they went right back to old ways, and they were just like, I've got to pay my bills. I've got children to raise. I cannot be on Fox News. I can't have, the PR person talking about, they have no power, when that wasn't even on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's not all about exposing, but it's about digesting, and then what can we do? Because the damage has been done, but we still have a whole generation of educators coming in, and then we've got all these children where will there be a school for them? I just saw there was an article where there's like 5,200 less kindergartners in Oregon this year. And people are like, where are the children? And it's like, well, okay, some people probably moved, but some people are probably homeschooling. Some people aren't having children anymore. There's all these things. But again, we keep on progressing. Will there be a K through 12? Because if there's no educators, then you're going to have monitors. Right. And so we've got to start talking about this now so that we can hopefully keep schools. Because while there's a lot of crap in schools, there's a lot of beauty in it. If you let the children be children and play and learn. Even one of the punishments was that I went from high school to middle school. They thought that was going to break me. But it was the best reprieve I ever had after teaching for 20 years in high school. And I learned how to play with kids. I was teaching 6th through 8th, and those children love games. They love toys and candy. And so when I went back to the high school, I brought that with me. High schoolers love it too, because they're still children.
Right.
Even though social media is like totally sexualizing them and pushing them into lifestyles that are not appropriate, when you get them, they're still just
their
cute.
Most basic essence.
Yes. And they like to joke around and stuff. And so if we don't help this right now, we're going to have just stoic, sad children who won't even show up.
Right.
Especially if there's bullying and the districts are allowing it because, everyone deserves an education, but not the victims. So there's just so many issues at this point where I'm just like, I've had too many experiences to just keep it to myself. And I am also a writer. And so, I've written about my experiences and stuff like that. But I like sharing, and I like getting people to think, and I want to hear what they think also, because I want to know those experiences, and to augment their voices.
Yeah. And I think that's the point of the podcast, right? Is to have as many different voices from different spaces as possible that we don't ever hear from. And so that's a huge part of my focus, is bringing in as many different types of people, whether they be in a classroom or parents
Yes.
or policy makers, policy analysts, whatever the case is, people that most Oregonians don't hear from.
Mm-hmm.
They get that information as it's distilled through lawmakers, administrators, or the like.
Yeah.
And so I think there's one thing that we haven't touched on too much. We touched on a little bit that I wanted to make sure we get in is that going back to the exclusionary nature of the state
Mm-hmm.
and its origins. One of the things that really struck me when I was aware of it, when I finally figured it out, was that Oregon is fundamentally created by people that were pushed out of the Midwest.
And ex-Confederate.
Ex-Confederate,
Yeah.
pushed out during the Civil War.
Uh-huh.
So slavery is still happening.
Mm-hmm.
And people know and they feel that there's no place for them in the Midwest because there is an economy there that doesn't need labor.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people felt like, a lot of people that I've talked to in the past who don't understand Oregon history see people coming from the Midwest, starting Oregon, and there's a connection made between Oregon as a blue state and Oregon as an anti-racist state. And the folks that came here to start this state were definitely not pro-slavery, but they were definitely not pro-African-American, pro-black folks at all. And so that is why you have the Exclusion Acts of Oregon to push people out and not to let people settle here. And so there's a connection made even today, and that a blue state is supposed to be an anti-racist state. And Oregon is very far from an anti-racist state. And so that's one of the things that I want to really double down on as we talk to people, is that doesn't just come out in policy explicitly.
Yeah.
You have to dig down a little bit to find out where the origins of these policies are. And just in the last year, I've seen many examples of this. And so, I want this podcast to be the voices of Oregonians and their experiences. And you really only get to those experiences of prejudice and racism through those stories, because they don't show up
Yeah.
in the media.
No.
Because I've tried to get the media to talk about them, and they just don't want anything to do with them.
Yeah.
And so I'm really, it's a word excited, but like to give voice to people, because one of the things that motivated me to start this was that I don't hear those voices.
Yeah.
There's no other podcast in our state that wants to elevate the voices of Oregonians
Yeah.
and their lived experiences. And so that's why I feel like this is a special moment that we can't do as much, although we can do some things nationally, but we can also hold people more accountable than they've ever been held locally and at a state level. Because people are not going to have it. They're not going to have this racist behavior or the policies that people are trying to create and make. So that's kind of another genesis for me along the way, was that once you know about Oregon's past, Oregon is, trust me, I've been here my whole life. I love Oregon. I love fishing. I love cycling. There's so many things I love about Oregon. But there has to be a time when we start to turn the corner of keeping people of color out of positions of power.
Mm-hmm.
So you look up and down our state. I don't think I'm mistaken that statewide elections, there's been, I want to say, one African American man who's been a state elected official in Oregon ever. And that was, I don't remember the year. I don't remember if he was Secretary of State or Treasurer, but that's what I recall. I don't know if that's true. But anyway, that's really important to me, that this podcast highlights those things.
Yeah. And just for my little perception, those who came here after the Civil War, I think they were pro-slavery, but they knew what that entailed.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. I may have said that in a way that didn't reflect what I really think.
Because they didn't want all the black people here, knowing that they weren't going to be able to enslave them. But they allowed people to bring their slaves here but they had to be out within a few years,
3 years.
after the homesteads were created.
Yes.
So there's, that part,
There's
right?
some great stories about those homestead, and many of them were women,
Yeah.
Black women who started homesteads in central Willamette Valley.
Yeah, we have got some really amazing historians who have gone back and traced this. And so I really want us to make sure that we're putting that out there because, again, forever the educators, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I've always said I don't think I would have moved here if I had known. And so my ex-husband, who's Black, we moved up here, and the racial thing started happening, and he was like, what what did we move to? I'm like, I don't know. But he's from Utah, so he was used to this stuff, and he's like, this feels really familiar. I'm from the Bay Area, so I'm like, what the hell is this, 1950s?
Yeah.
And so when I was having the N-word written on my walls and my desks in the classroom, and the janitors weren't cleaning it up, and the admin was like, yeah, that's our kids. I was just like, what? And now the internet was still very young, so it didn't have everything on there, but I just had to go to the internet to find out what's wrong, because there's something really wrong here, and I'd never heard of anything about Oregon except trees. And I remember because my stepfather is an artist, and he had made my grandfather, who lived in Coos Bay, an owl sweatshirt, and my grandmother had said, thank you for doing that, but we live in Coos Bay and this will get him injured. And I was like,
Because of
what?
the spotted owl.
Yeah, the spotting owl, right? And this
Yeah.
is a logging industry. And we were in the Bay Area, so I'm like, okay, that's weird Oregon story. And that was all I had for Oregon,
Yeah.
So I was very ignorant about it. And so when I started looking, and I had seen about all of the exclusionary, Walida has a professor at Portland State, right? She created like a 20-page document, just like putting it all out there, and it was a PDF. So I printed that out and I took it home to my ex-husband, and I said, oh my God, we made a mistake. And by that time I was pregnant, and so we had our first child, and my coworkers are like, aren't you going to move up here? And I'm like, y'all can't even treat me, who's only part Black. Like, what are you going to do to my son? And then, I was asking the history teachers, do you teach about the Black exclusionary? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And then, looking into the curriculum and seeing that nowhere is it mandatory knowledge of Oregon's history on Black exclusionary, which once I learned all about this, everything made sense of how I was treated, how we're looked at and stuff, the passive aggressive behavior. Because my mother would always say, my mother was born in Alabama and raised in Texas, and she would say, I miss the South because at least they would tell you to your face. But up here, they hug and stab you in the back. And woo, didn't I experience that time and time again? And so I'm just wondering if we brought that into the middle school, would that change? Because the middle schoolers are really mean to each other. Of course, they might just use it as ammunition to just be crueler to each other. But there's a pathway to end a lot of the stupid racism that happens amongst the children. If we just gave them the education to go, do you even understand the depth of what you're parroting or what you're joking about?
Yeah.
This is not just hee hee ha ha. You know?
Yeah. Well, I think that as we sit here, we bring some really unique perspectives.
Absolutely.
I'm so interesting you brought up the spotted owl, because my parents both worked in the wood products industry, and the spotted owl was the devil in our house.
Right?
Yeah, it was incredible how bad the spotted owl, if you could not talk about the spotted owl.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this concludes our first episode of Oregon Voices, and we are going to continue to, I don't know, I mean, it's all new to me, so we're going to continue to tape and put things out there. And we're going to have avenues for people out there to contact us
Absolutely.
with their stories, so we can hear more and perhaps have people on the podcast with us from different places that we don't even know about.
No.
And so we appreciate everybody listening, and that's it.
Yes, it's been fun. I'm really excited of what we're going to be doing. So thank you, everybody,
Awesome.
for listening.
Thank you for coming with me
Yes.
on the journey.
Thank you.
Yeah.